I understand what you don't like about me. I do. I wish I could do something about this. I can't. I can promise you two things. One, I'll always look this good. And two, I'll never give up on you. Ever.
I like that.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode 80, in fact, of The Fear of God. We are here every single week having a conversation about the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre, and having that conversation is myself, Reed Lackey, and typically with me is one Mr. Nathan Rouse, but unfortunately he was having some trouble shaving down his horns, and so he had to go to a very specific barber and have that done. I don't quite know what that means. Also, he said that, his tail had a mind of its own. It was some sort of weird thing. And I don't know. I know my tail tends to have a mind of its own whenever, like, my favorite jam comes on. Whenever something is really rocking, then my tail really gets a grip. Oh, Nathan, hi, buddy. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm not as horny as I was before I went to the barber, the horn barber. So
we'll just leave it there.
Yeah, do that.
So
what's funny about you talking about shaking your tail or your tail having a mind of your own? The other night, while doing dishes, because I'm a 2018 husband, I had the 80s on my Spotify, and I don't remember exactly what the song was, but I was just jamming. I was just dancing to the 80s, and my wife was like, You haven't even had any alcohol or anything. Like, this is just you, isn't it? I was like, yeah, it is. And then I shook it. I did it.
That's awesome. That is so
anyway,
awesome.
So yeah. So here we are, episode 80.
Episode 80. We're right in the heart of hashtag Del Toro, Toro, Toro.
We're officially octogenarians here at The Fear of God. You like that?
Hey, that is really great. I'm glad you pulled that up. That's that. Yeah. Now I'm struggling to find out what the 90 would be, because I don't have that in my. Would that be?
Is that Septua? What's Sep?
Sept. Well, see, I thought Sept was 7.
Then you might be right. We'll have to look that up.
We'll figure it out. Yeah, but kudos on octogenarian. So yeah, we are still in the throes of our series on Guillermo del Toro. And we are covering this week his probably one of his biggest sort of blockbusters, as it were, in terms of popularity. I know Pacific Rim has quite a bit of at least fan affection, but yeah, we're going to be covering Hellboy. So before we get into all of that, Nathan, I just got to know what you watching, what you reading.
What you reading?
What you listening to?
What are you listening to? Thank you for those smooth stylings of Reed Lackey.
I don't. Half the time, I don't know what's going on in my brain before it happens.
That's all right. That's how it goes. I was re-listening to. Was it The Devil's Backbone that I did the Bob Dylan one? That was really funny.
I think that was.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
you thought it was funny. Yeah.
It was quite funny. Bob Dylan thought it was funny too. He told me. He said, "Good job, Nathan." So I'm gonna throw a grenade in a backpack here that will hopefully maybe spawn a little bit of conversation here. And like, Reed, Riri.
Uh-oh.
Reed.
Uh-oh.
You know what you know what I saw recently?
Oh, no. What'd you see?
Brother, I saw Annihilation.
Oh, yes. Yes,
So,
indeed.
yes, I did go see Annihilation, and I will confess to a slight bit of overhype. And in that kind of first hour.
Gotcha.
You know, I was trying to kind of adjust to the frequency of the movie, and the movie operates on a very specific frequency. However, even in saying that, I will state that few movies have left me thinking longer than that of late. Like, there hasn't been a movie I can think of in the last couple years at least where I am still kind of meditating on what that movie does and where it goes and what on earth it all means. So while I would say to a listener, if they're interested in the movie, it is absolutely worth your time, you may feel that twinge like I did of like, I'm not sure, but it's a meditative piece of art, and
Oh, absolutely.
you know, you will be mulling it and thinking about it, and I mean, the night I came home, I spent 45 minutes at midnight, like just looking at reviews and think pieces, and like, oh, that meant that.
Sure.
Wow, you know, just there's a lot of stuff to kind of absorb that the movie does, and so I would, for me personally, on the whole, I think Ex Machina is pound for pound a better film to me.
I wouldn't disagree. Yeah, I agree.
But what Annihilation does well, it does insanely well. You know, whether it's, as you alluded to, that ridiculously freaky scene in the 2/3 mark, or
the bear scene.
Yeah, the last 20 minutes of the movie. I mean, it operates on a very different level than a lot of its peers.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It's a very provocative and very thought-provoking film. And I really appreciate films that invest in their science fiction ideas. This is a film that is very much exploring some conceptual things that I think are very interesting. So yeah.
Now,
I was a big fan of it as well.
I don't think I've inquired this of you. Have you read the books or the book?
No, this is one where I have not. I was immediately became very interested in the book once I saw the film, but no, I haven't. As of this recording, I have not yet read.
Well,
the
it's a trilogy. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah,
No.
It's called the Southern Reach trilogy, and interestingly, I was listening to a podcast discussing it. Garland wrote the screenplay after just one reading of the book. The first book in the trilogy.
Oh, wow.
And more or less wrote it kind of from memory. It was more about, and this will make sense if you've seen the movie, it was more kind of feeling and sense and intuition and a response to the text.
Oh, wow.
To the point that my understanding is, I think the author's name is James Vandermeer. You get the impression that he doesn't love the movie because it does take some very specific deviations, but like a good person who probably made a lot of money when his book got optioned by Hollywood, he's being a sport and doing the promotional circuit kind of thing.
Sure.
Anyway,
That makes sense.
I did see Annihilation. I would encourage any of our listeners, and who knows, maybe we'll actually cover it on the show at some point, but it is very worthy of your time.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I definitely think it's a Fear of God candidate at the very least. So I'm going to do a book, something I'm reading. It's very brief. I literally got it from the library like 2 days ago, and I'm almost done with it. It's called You're Not That Great, but neither is everybody else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's called.
I thought you just
You're Not That
paused
Great.
to insult me before you told the title of the book.
No. It's called. It's by a person named Elon Gale, and producer on The Bachelor, the show The Bachelor, which I have some complicated feelings about the show. I know it's very popular with a number of people and whatever, but the book itself is very interesting. Elon Gale is not a believer by any stretch. That's pretty evident in some of the observations, but it's a very thought-provoking and, dare I say, like kind of comforting look at just being honest with yourself and being honest with your expectations and being honest with your navigation throughout the world, and the complications that come along with that. So, he makes some really potent observations about what we do to try to, make ourselves feel better about ourselves and make ourselves, and he deals quite a bit in the book with sort of expectation management. Like, I see this other person and I see how they have it, and that elicits want and desire in me to be like that. But he has some surprisingly comforting observations in that. The book is called "You're Not That Great, but Neither Is Anyone Else." And it's by Elan Gale. His name's spelled Elan, last name Gale.
I mean, is this a case of you just saw a cover and found it intriguing? Like, what provoked your...
This is one of my library browses. Occasionally, which I don't get the chance to do very much anymore. It used to be a weekly thing, but now it's about once a month, or in the really busy times, once every other month, where I'll go to the library and I'll just look at the new shelves, or I'll browse a particular section and then just grab a title or a cover that looks interesting to me. I know you can't judge a book by its cover, but I just randomly grab what looks or sounds interesting to me. And I've often stumbled across some really cool things. This was one of just the library grabs.
Interesting.
Yep. So that's what I've been reading.
But see, now I just want to go binge watch The Bachelor.
That I'm really surprised you got that from what I got.
That was a joke, because I really have no interest whatsoever in doing that.
That's like the Alka-Seltzer commercial that started selling spaghetti sauce. It's like, have you heard that story?
Yeah.
So ladies and gentlemen, that was another edition of
What You Watching? What are you reading? What are you listening to?
Tell me now.
I just did. Wow. All right. So it's a two-pod night. All right. So we are.
You can always tell.
We are in the throes of hashtag Del Toro, Toro, Toro. We began with the prologue 2 weeks ago with The Orphanage, a fantastic movie that we gave one of our highest rankings ever. We then continued with last week's The Devil's Backbone, which I did not necessarily love the watching of, which sounds like I did not like it. That's not what I meant to convey there. However, whatever I felt about the watching of, I really loved our conversation and felt like there were some really cool things to present themselves in it. And today we are talking about the Mike Mignola created, Guillermo del Toro adapted,
yes,
Hellboy #1.
Hellboy #1.
Yes. And I'm sure I will feel this even more profoundly when we get to Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah.
It is difficult to watch the execution of, even include Shape of Water in there. Like, it's difficult to watch the execution of Del Toro's monsters and not think, good Lord, why could we have not had Del Toro's Hobbit? Like, it's so
right.
It's so frustrating that those aren't good. Let's just be honest, they're not good movies, and it's such a shame to feel like, oh, what could have been.
Yeah, and he's had a few, like, there's so many. There's a book that I was reading in preparation for this called Cabinet of Curiosities, which is a really great book about Del Toro's like notebooks and some of his sketches and thoughts, and it's got a lot of his artwork in there and everything. And when you look in that and you get to the section on abandoned projects, now Hobbit wasn't included in that abandoned projects, but when you get to the section on, like, his idea for At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, and you look at some of the things that he has begun pursuit of trying to see fruition of happening, and then it just sort of dissolves or it doesn't come into play. He's an incredibly fascinating individual.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Like, I don't get any impression whatsoever, and what I'm about to follow with makes it sound like I'm countering that and suggesting he is, because that's why I'm saying I don't think he is like this. I don't think he's a difficult creative. He certainly does not cast that aura. But it is interesting the number of projects. Well, I guess I'm just thinking of two specifically that he's been long attached to that just go nowhere. The Hobbit being one of them, and I don't know if you know this, but like Justice League Dark, like for years, he's been his name has been attached to that, and I still think his name is still attached to that, even loosely. I was like, that's never gonna happen. You know, like just let's all be honest here. Zack Snyder's directing that, and it's gonna be fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it's in the title. It's dark. It's Justice League Dark. That is Zack Snyder's stock and
the
trade.
embargo's off. Yes,
the embargo is lifted. The embargo is lifted.
The embargo is officially lifted. Exactly. Oh, it's so true.
I mean, I think
so
we already
true.
had Justice League Dark. It came out last year.
Which I still haven't seen, by the way. All this time.
I
still haven't
haven't
seen.
either.
But no, so like it's funny because anybody who works with him, you hear nearly nothing but praise about Guillermo del Toro, by the way.
Right. I got it.
You hear nearly nothing but praise about like the on-set feeling, the general work ethic, and the craftsmanship, the unbelievable attention to detail on things like tone and rhythm and general aesthetic of the film, and of each of the film's individual pieces. Like, he's a very deliberate and very calculated director. But yeah, it is funny. I don't get the sense that he is by any means a difficult creative. I do think he is difficult for certain. I could see this not ever being a studio executive. I could see how a studio executive might find him difficult to market, or difficult to promote, or difficult to sort of wrap their heads around what he was trying to accomplish. Like, I feel like there's 3 different Del Toros that we get. I feel like first you get your horror, which would be like your Kronos, your Mimic. I would throw Crimson Peak in there. That's like your straightforward horror. Right?
I actually have not, real quick interruption. I've not seen Crimson Peak. Do you like it?
I like it quite a bit.
Yeah,
I like it quite a bit. I don't think it's his strongest work, but I like it quite a bit. I was very taken into the aesthetic of it, but it is very much a sort of in the vein of like the Hammer horror films, which I still don't think you've seen most of those, but so it's not like jump, make you scared, anything like that. There's definitely some horrific things and a couple of really tense moments, but it's very much a sort of the gothic strain and very atmospheric, which I responded to very positively. I like Crimson Peak quite a lot. So you got your horror Del Toro, and then you've got your what I will call the fairy tale Del Toro, and I would even put Devil's Backbone. I have difficulty deciding whether to put it in almost the like ghost fairy tale or into the straight horror, but that's like your Pan's Labyrinth, that's your Shape of Water. They're like, very much like adult fairy tales. And then
Very
you have, especially Shape of Water. We'll get there. But
I can't wait.
But then I feel like you have your more just sort of popcorn blockbuster guy. Like you got and these have horror elements to it, and they have monsters in them, but you've got your Blade 2, your Hellboy 1 and 2, you've got your Pacific Rim. And I feel like those are really easy for people to sort of get their heads around and say like, oh yeah, well, we understand what this is going to be and we'll let him do his thing. But yeah, there are certain projects where I feel like when he approaches the project, it's almost as if his very distinct vision runs into conflict with what the studios sort of wanted to take with the film. Like, I remember reading, he was offered Blade 2, and he told his agent, I don't want to do Blade 2. Like, I have no interest in doing Blade 2. And then his agent was like, do you ever want to do Hellboy? And he said, well, yeah, I've been wanting to do Hellboy for a long time. He said, no studio is going to greenlight you on Hellboy with only Mimic and Kronos. Like, they're not going to do it. You've got to do like a straightforward sort of action blockbuster so that they can see that you can handle this kind of material. So you got to do Blade 2. He was originally attached to do an adaptation long before the Will Smith one of I Am Legend, and the vampire design that he had crafted sort of in the throes of I Am Legend evolved into what we saw in Blade 2. Now, I cannot remember. Have you seen Blade 2? Or
I've not.
Eventually, like, it's not like run out, see it right now. He has much better films, but it is surprisingly good. And I think that is I think that will be your experience. You'll go in with pretty low expectations and you'll be like, that is much better than I thought it was going to be. And so, but he did Blade 2, and that of course got him into, link with getting signed on to do Hellboy. But yeah, it's interesting. Everybody who works with him seems to have nothing but praise about his persona, the way he treats people, the way he engages with the material, his craftsmanship. So it is a bit surprising that he can't seem to always get projects he loves off the ground.
Well, it's funny. I'm tipping my hand a little bit with maybe some of my feelings on Hellboy, but I think it's fascinating to juxtapose something like The Devil's Backbone with, I would say, maybe Hellboy. And it's been years since I've seen Hellboy 2. I only saw it the one time, so I would not be able to use it as a basis for the conversation. But between Hellboy and Pacific Rim, much more so Pacific Rim, though, again, I would lump Hellboy in here a little bit. You've got Devil's Backbone, which, again, regardless of whether I adored it or just really appreciated it, there's a lot that is happening on the page and under the page in The Devil's Backbone.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
But then you have something like Hellboy, which is pretty straightforward, and even much more so Pacific Rim, which it's like, I remember watching Pacific Rim in the theater and being like, yep. That's exactly what you sold me. You know, is yes, giant robots and giant monsters beating the crap out of each other. There's really nothing else going on here, which is kind of cool, and I like it, and I'm gonna eat my popcorn. You know, like that was fun. Which it is good, and it shows skill as a storyteller and craftsman to be able to go big and kind of, if we can say it, brainless, and then have these quieter films like Backbone that are rich in what is really going on in it. So no, I mean, he's unquestionably talented, and for as personally as much as I feel like his overall oeuvre, I wouldn't categorize him as like a favorite for me. I'm still a deep appreciator and respecter of his skill and talent and craftsmanship.
Oh yeah, no question about it. And I will tell you, so the night that I refreshed to watch to prepare for this conversation, I watched Hellboy. And then I had enough time in the evening, so I went on and watched Hellboy 2. I very much think that the value of this kind of conversation, we should start with the first one, because the first one has some very particular themes that are very different from the Golden Army. But yeah, the Golden Army is, I think, the more fun and, dare I say, better film. Some people would disagree with me about, but I think Golden Army is the better of the two movies. And it is interesting because in Golden Army, and this is why I bring it up, Golden Army is where you see a bit more of what you and I are talking about his sort of the thematic undertones, the what's under the page.
Right.
Hellboy feels much more direct and feels much more straightforward, which is why I think Golden Army feels somewhat elevated, because it is a little bit more digging into some of the themes and the characterization that's taking place. If we ever have a conversation about it, I do have some tweaks to my feelings about the ending. Not necessarily how the story resolves, but just how the film ends. But that's a conversation for another time. We are talking about the first one. Now, was this your first or second? What viewing of it was it for you?
This would be number 2. This would be, I'm pretty sure, I definitely saw it in the theater, and I don't think I've seen it since then. So this was a second go round. And one quick Nathan Rouse shout out. Hellboy and I, in addition to our physiques being epically ripped and shredded, we do
yes.
we do share birthdays. I don't know if you caught that.
No, I didn't.
If we are basing birthday on when Hellboy enters our reality, which was October 9th, 1944, I was like, hey.
All right.
October 9th, me and Hellboy.
You are kindred spirits with a demon who is set to destined to bring the apocalypse. That is great.
But until love and patriarchal affection avert apocalypse. Hey, I'm down with that. I'm down with that.
Exactly.
That's all the themes. Exactly. That's all the theme I have right there. No, I will say in terms of watching the movie, we are in peak superhero movie. I think many observers may have thought we were cresting the other side of it, but between Black Panther last month going on to become the highest grossing superhero movie of all time, which is, shout out Wakanda Forever, and us being weeks away from Infinity War, we are in full-throated superhero, intensity.
Sure.
It is interesting to watch this movie and be so stinking impressed with the creature designs. And a lot of this is rooted in Mike Mignola, who here's a brief ad from our sponsors here. Like, how much of Hellboy have you read?
Very little.
Okay.
In fact, I did read. So that's one thing you could speak to more effectively than I could, because I've read when the film first came out. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it, I think, at its initial home video release. But when it came out, I did sort of seek out some of the trades of Mike Mignola's work. But it has been since then that I've read something. I didn't reread anything in preparation for this.
Yeah, well, and I would echo a similar sentiment there. My sort of awareness of the comic world, it's been kind of on the radar for years and years now. At the point of the movie's release, I did consume a lot of it. And I think some of my dissonance with the film adaptation has a lot to do, and hear me, I'm not like a Hellboy devotee. There are plenty of people who are much more avid and rabid fanboys of that than I am, but I really fell in love with the conceit, and which on the page, which anytime you're adapting a wealth of material, a lot of things are going to get consolidated or just completely ignored, so I recognize that. But on the page, I just loved this kind of like, this will make sense to you. This X-Files, but where the Mulder and Scully character is a monster himself. That's the premise.
Absolutely.
And I just really loved that notion as it's expressed in the book. Now, it came to have a lot more of a spine of mythology to it, and I recognize that. But in terms of just the pure adventures of Hellboy, it was him just exploring and investigating with the BPRD these ancient paranormal type of things. And I was like, this is really cool.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like to a certain degree, the movie sets some of that to the side for the overall sort of necessity of the adaptation process. But regardless, where I was starting there is trying to just gush about the creature design, the character design. Cronin, I think is his name. I love that character.
He's freakish and fantastic. Yeah.
So this was a second viewing for you?
This was a third for me. So I viewed it.
Okay.
Yeah. But none of it was in the theater. So I viewed it when it first came out to home video. Wasn't that taken with it? So a couple of years later, it came out in 2004, and I want to say around like the 2006, 2007 mark. Mm-hmm. I got it, and it was one of those. This is gonna sound so awful, but it was one of those like $5 bin at Walmart for the director's cut. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll pick it up. I got a little bit of disposable money, and so I did that, and then I watched it then and liked it a little bit more. I was like, I'm glad I have it, and that was just sort of where my shrug was. This viewing, I'm not quite sure why. Maybe we'll be able to unpack why. This particular viewing, I was much more favorable to it in an unexpected way. I was not expecting to respond to it as positively. I still don't think I'll even make this statement. I still don't think it's quite as good as it maybe could have been. And there's definitely some things that I would be like, okay, yeah, it's kind of in that upper B level movie, right? Like a B plus kind of thing. But I was much more favorable to it this time around.
Do you know? So I guess clarify. Have you seen the non-director's version?
Yes, that's the version that I saw when it first came to home video.
Can you?
And I have no memory for it.
I've not seen. Okay, well, maybe this question will go nowhere then. I've not seen the director's version. Do you have any clue what differences there are?
I don't. From my understanding, because there's director's cuts out there of things like Mimic. I don't think there's a director's cut of Blade 2, but from my understanding of it, very few of his director's cuts are anything related to, like, we're not about to have a Descent moment where it is like, like a different ending or something like that. But as far as I understand, his director's cuts are basically expanding on the characters or expanding on the world. So it'll be like extensions of scenes that exist in the film, but in much more abbreviated versions.
Sure.
That's as much as my understanding. The only reason that I watched the director's cut this time around is because that happened to be the version that I bought from Walmart.
Right. And you were like, meh, $5.
But you know what's crazy about it? So that version was $5, and here was another reason why it was enticing, because I'm not prone anymore to just like buying films that I didn't care that much for. It's 3 discs long, and it includes a 2.5 hour making of film. on that second disc. And like, there's a whole nother third disc of supplemental material. Like, there is just a glut of material on this set that I've only at the barest minimum dove into, but that was what was so appealing to me about wow, it's like 3 discs and $5. Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that because there's probably a lot of valuable stuff in there about him, if nothing else.
Well, I think that's one of the things that kind of disheartens me a little bit is like, I really want to feel favorable to this first film. Because just generally having an affection for Del Toro as a person and creative, 2, having an affection towards the character itself, but 3, right. you can tell it was made with heart and passion.
Absolutely.
I struggled personally this time around, especially to really find a lot of resonance in terms of things, and I think maybe this will make some sense. So one of the things I struggled with in my viewing, and I'm going to sound like such a nerd here, is like, I don't know that I love the anchor of the story being the Liz and Hellboy romance.
Okay.
And I think, I don't know, like, I'm all for, romantic misadventures with superheroes and that sort of thing. But I feel like, at least what I recall of the printed work, it was that wasn't as highly played. And so it was a much more kind of take charge type of character, wherein the film, it's much more of a like, and hear me, which I actually like some of what they do. I mean, I think the scene on the roof with the little boy is good. Yeah, I mean, that's really good kind of character work once I kind of buy into what is going on. I just don't know that I love that as the through line to the film, if that makes any sense at all.
Well, yeah, and I will say this, and I'm not going to bring this up 40 times. One of the things that I did actively think when I watched this, I don't care almost at all for Selma Blair's performance in Hellboy 1. And that was even further solidified by how much I enjoyed her performance in Hellboy 2. Mm-hmm. I don't know what was going on there, but I think one of the things for me, one of the reasons why that doesn't work that much is I'm not that bought in on her as a character and as a performer. She seems a bit one note. Seems a bit underdeveloped, as it were. She does have a couple of cool moments, but he is so vibrant of a character,
right?
Both in Ron Perlman's performance and his general look and the way he's scripted and everything. And so I think that is one thing that sort of hinders it and holds it back a little bit for me, is their romance is supposed to be the emotional anchor of the film,
right?
That and we'll get to here, but that and his adoption by John Hurt's character, which
I think personally, sorry to cut you off, I think that is well executed. Like, I really actually love that component of the story and of the realization of it on screen, and little things. This is, and I am acknowledging this as a tiny nitpick. But I was listening to a podcast recently, and they're talking about it's a pop culture podcast, but one of the hosts was referencing human moments in movies, and like in movie or TV, and how characters eating and things like this, just these little human moments that really don't do much in terms of story advancement, but just add a little tweak of dimensionality to the character. I'm recognizing this is a nitpick, and so don't drag me across the coals too much on this, but little things like the insistence on showing us how often they're bringing him massive amounts of food. Do you notice that he literally never eats any food? It's like,
yes, it's true.
Okay, well, again, I know it's a nitpick, but little things like that where it's like, but at the same time, you're asking me to buy in on a romance that I'm a little like, I don't know. Anyway, right. I'm nitpicking.
Yeah.
Because what is, difficult is that there is a lot I do like about the movie. I love the opening sequence in Scotland when he first enters the story. Yeah. It's a really great set piece. John Hurt, as always, is fantastic.
Yes.
As always, suffers an unfortunate, untimely demise.
I'm trying to think of a movie in which John Hurt hasn't died. I mean, spoiler.
Well, he doesn't in as Ollivander, at least on screen. I don't think.
That's true.
He just gets taken.
True.
I know. I like how you're like, nah, small comfort,
it's like, there's still an overwhelming glut of films in which he has a death scene.
There's that one. Well, and he's so good, and I I do think it's well cast. It's excellently designed.
Yeah.
I love that Del Toro generally leans into practical effects. It's funny. I don't know, and I probably pay attention to this more than is healthy. I don't know, but you can see in the film as it progresses, the Samael creatures, you can discern when it's a man in a suit and when it's digital. And and when it's a man in a suit, I'm like, oh, it looks so good. It looks so good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, it reminds me of, randomly, this is getting a second reference here, in Black Panther. One of the few things I don't like about Black Panther is honestly the sort of ramp up to, and it's an overlong scene in general, but the underground train fight at the end. I'm like, this is CGI and just zeros and ones punching each other, you know? So I do give Del Toro props, because he does mine the well of practical effects very well, which we'll see,
and of course
in an excellent fashion in Pan's Labyrinth when we get there. But what were you going to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was just going to also sing the praises of Abe Sapien. Jones. That's a man in a costume. That's Jug Jones's artwork, being his skills with his body. And so, that's something that I really appreciate. Again, it gets to that attention to detail. Mm-hmm. Del Toro is very deliberate with his attention to detail. The Samael creatures are very specifically and deliberately crafted. And you can tell, even when you only see flashes of them. I love that subway fight. That subway fight is so great. It's so great. And I really do. I think I briefly mentioned, and I can't remember where or on which episode it was, but I think I briefly mentioned that I loved the look of David Harbour as the Hellboy in the upcoming Hellboy. And I said very cavalierly that at first I was like, I think he looks better than Perlman. I'm going to have to retract that, or at least scale back on it, because I was really taken with just how Perlman looks in that makeup, in that suit. He carries himself so perfectly in that role. He's very well suited for that role. I'm sure David Harbour will do a fantastic job. I'm rooting for him. I think it'll be great. But I don't want to take anything away from Perlman, because I think Perlman does such a phenomenal job in this. So and that's the thing, is like this time around, I was kind of expecting, I knew that, listeners peek behind the curtain when we're sort of just trying to decide, hey, we're doing a series on Del Toro, what are we going to talk about? And we knew, like, okay, Hellboy is kind of an obvious entry that we need to include when we're talking about this. But I always sort of viewed it as, well, this is the one we're just going to not like get by, not like a filler episode, but I was like, I'm sure we'll mine some strong things from it, but I wasn't that fond or affectionate of the film. This time around, I was. I was very taken with a few very specific things. You've already mentioned several of them. I loved the tone. I love the look of some of the characters. I love the action sequences. I think every action sequence in this film is very effective. I love that you get those close-up shots where there's like the dramatic angles, but then you also get the camera pulls back and you get to see a lot of what's actually taking place, which you can tell took a lot of effort to have them execute some of those scenes. So I really appreciate
I love the Abe underwater scene. I think.
Oh yes, yes.
I would have a very short list of actual bullet point scares for this film, but and I don't even know that one tips over into scares. It's just a really well executed suspense scene.
Oh, absolutely. When he drops the little the vial that's supposed to, and I'm like, oh man. And I remember the first time around, I was like, well, of course they're going to take out the buddy. Of course they're going to take out Abe. So I was really glad that he survived. But that's a very, very tense, nerve-wracking scene. I think when Hellboy's horns grow back, that whole moment is very affecting to me. It's not quite a scare, but just that whole thing of the monster. Oh my gosh, it does. It's so Lovecraftian, but it's beautiful and brilliant and in its horror. The big tentacled monster kind of coming down and emerging in the thing. It's a very grand sort of moment, and very epic in its scale, but also epic on I'll get to this in theme, but also very broad and epic in its emotional resonance, that specific scene, because that to me is the climactic moment of the film. When he battles with the big beast at the very end, to me that's like denouement. That's like still following.
I'm glad
resolution.
You're saying that, because I was gonna sound like such a hater. Like, to me, that's so anticlimactic. Like it's
it does feel a bit anticlimactic because like I do like the moment. It's a trailer moment, and I do like the moment. He's talking to Myers, and he's like, "How big can it be?" As this huge tentacle thing like comes and dragged him back. That's a good moment. That's a really good moment. But the overall fight is a little anticlimactic to me. The climactic center of the film is this whole: is he going to revoke his destiny, or is he going to embrace it? And that to me was the emotional and narrative.
Nature versus nurture, brother. Nature versus nurture all day long, all eternity long. Real quick before we walk too far down that infernal path, we got to give props. Probably one of my favorite sequences in the whole film. If I were to watch Golden Army, it might still hold up against whatever might be in there. I love Ivan. We need to give a shout out to Ivan. The rancorous, corpse. That's great. It's great. And you may or may not know this, but that is directly lifted from the text. I don't know if the actual dialogue is. I don't know that, but in terms of the imagery of Hellboy carrying around this disembodied corpse for purposes of a guide, is very much out of the book. But I love that sequence.
So great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and when he falls down the whole big thing,
that was great.
Oh my God, it's so great.
That was great.
Yeah, it's really, really great. Yeah, I love old Ivan. But yeah, I mean, like, and I think you and I are going to have somewhat similar themes. You already sort of tipped your hand a bit to this, but to me, the thing that I really wanted to talk about for myself, the focal point of the thematic conversation in this conversation, centering around the character of John Hurt, and specifically the notion that Hellboy it's referenced a couple of times. It's referenced again in Golden Army, where they say he is destined to bring about apocalypse, to bring about the destruction and the end of the world. And one of the lines that really stuck out to me is, and we're just going to dive right in. One of the lines that stuck out to me was when in that climactic moment when Rasputin is basically compelling Hellboy to bring about his destiny and open this portal to hell, which will bring about the destruction of the world, Myers, who has been badly wounded and is bandaged up, Liz at this point is passed out, they think dead because her soul has been like sucked up, and so they're pretty sure that she's just not coming back at this point. And Hellboy is about to do this thing, and then Myers shouts out to him, and just these words, I mean, Del Toro's not a believer. I know that he was raised Catholic, but I also know that he's not a believer at this moment. He's a lapsed Catholic by his open declaration. But this moment resonated so powerfully with me when Myers said, "You have a choice." He said, "Your father gave you that."
Yeah.
And there's so many touch points in the film, like almost getting a little teary when his father John Hurt is staring down what he knows will be his ultimate demise. Rasputin is broken in. They've sort of snuck in. Cronin is there, and Cronin sort of snuck in as a corpse. And then fast forwarding through a lot of narrative plot, but basically, John Hurt knows he's going to die. He knows that he's going to get taken out. And then they're talking about Hellboy, about what he really is. You know that I know his real name, and he's saying all these other things. And then Hurt says to him, like, "It doesn't matter what you call. I know what to call him, and nothing you can do will ever change that. I call him son." And I just Nathan. I got a little emotional.
Yeah. It was great. It was great.
It's a really affecting. It's a really affecting moment, and it is ultimately that images they stuck out to me more, perhaps because I knew we were preparing for a conversation on this show. But images like at the funeral for his father, this demon. He's a demon. Like in the narrative of this film, he is a demon holding a rosary. Mm-hmm. I'm like, dang. And I mean, it was his father's rosary. And again, spoiler alert it's not a spoiler, but tipping the hand to Golden Army. Through the entirety of Golden Army, he's got that rosary wrapped around his hand. So it's there with him. It's like, it's a part of who he is.
Sure.
And then, all those little images and touch points, those little moments like, Myers throws the rosary at him at that climactic moment when he's about to open the portal of hell, and it burns the image of the cross on his hand.
Yeah.
And there's so much wrapped up in it from a thematic standpoint of, you were meant to be this thing. You were built and designed and created to be this destructive thing of evil, as it were, thing of apocalyptic destruction. But you were adopted into something else. And because you were adopted into this other thing, then you have been given a choice. You've been given a choice to be something else and do something else. And that is so immensely powerful to me. For all the things that I would fault and that we have faulted the film for, I think that largely bolstered my affection, was just that reflection that, like, hey, you have been given a choice not to be this other thing, but to be this instead. And I just found that deeply affecting.
I love that you can even blow that out a little bit, in the sense that this very direct line between Broom, John Hurt's character, and Hellboy. But even take it a little step further, and like, this is maybe, I was going to say this is applying more than perhaps what is intended, but maybe that's not true, and maybe this is where Del Toro's through line of his work overall reveals itself in the Hellboy story, is these misshapen misfits with this adoptive father who they help push back the dark. You know, we're the things that knock back. Is that, what does he say?
Oh, there are things that go bump.
Things that go bump in the night. We're the things that bump back. Yeah. You know, and again, that's a great, as you alluded to with the other one, that's a great trailer line. But even then, take it into its deeper connotations of just like, you know, not only are you, in the case of Hellboy specifically, subsuming this inherent genetic sort of predisposition, you are then actively working for, quote unquote, the light or the good, you know, and that's a you know, unquestionably a really powerful take on this story. And I know this seems like a really random intersection here, and we don't have to spend long here, but I think you might roll your eyes at me. This is one of the reasons I didn't love talk about Kevin so much, and what I tried to articulate in my reaction to the Kevin character was, it's like, it's very similar. You know, ostensibly Hellboy is, quote unquote, born bad, but the impact and effect of interaction and community and love sways that in him. Now, again, I know the pieces are going after different ideas, and I totally understand that. But just taken on their face, the character of Kevin felt so kind of... It is funny to say I can relate more to Hellboy than I can to Kevin, just because I felt like it was very much a one-track path. Regardless, we don't need to camp out there long, but it makes me think of that, like, because
I understand,
because the idea of the Hellboy character is, can your circuitry be overridden, you know?
Yes,
by something stronger and more powerful, and I think that's a really powerful idea.
Yeah, because and again, it comes back to that you have a choice. There is a choice at hand. We've talked before. I think that this theme hit pretty heavy when we talked about the invitation, you know, which feels like quite a while ago now. But when we talked about the invitation and that idea of you have before you life and death, so choose life. You know, like there's this notion of you can go this way or that way. You are not necessarily doomed or destined into this one specific path, into this one specific track, as it were. And yeah, I think on this very subtextual level, there was something about just the character of Hellboy, just the whole nature of, I just found it very compelling and powerful this time around, this notion that, he does not have to be what he is claimed by so many people to be, either a monster or a freak. You know, Abe says to Liz at one point, this is after Abe is wounded, and and then Liz is trying to figure out whether or not she's going to go and help Hellboy, and he says to her, and I thought this was really, really strong. He says, "If there's trouble, all us freaks have is each other."
Yeah, that was great.
And I think it would be really easy for us to look at the sort of the freakish nature of things. And again, we talked in Devil's Backbone about how compassionate Guillermo del Toro is towards all of his monsters, towards all of his people. So in a way, Hellboy is a really natural fit because he's a monster that you really want to you want to root for him. But there is this notion of like somebody's got to stand up for the freaks without necessarily having to change how you look. It doesn't have to define who and how you are.
Right.
Like one of the things we had a shout out to a listener, Vera Goody, I think is how you say your last name. When we had our conversation about the orphanage,
That was great.
And had a very articulate, very moving observation about people who are treated by society. Again, this is back to the conversation about the orphanage, and I'll loop it back into Hellboy in a second. But treated by society as if they should have proverbial bags over their heads, that they should just basically like, oh, okay, we're just going to hide you away. We don't know how to deal with you. We don't know how to communicate with you. We don't know what to do about you. So we're just going to hide you away. And we don't want to have to think about you. So that's the point. And in our brief exchange, on the Facebook page, this notion of, that's the idea that Christ brings us into, of like stepping forward and removing the bag and saying, here, come with us. We've saved a place at the table just for you, where you don't have to feel like a freak, where you don't have to feel like you don't belong. And I think it is so, it's interesting. Devil's Backbone opens with this, what is a ghost?
Right.
Did you also notice that probably because of, such successive viewing, that this opens up with ponderings of what is a man?
Right.
And that's what it begins and ends the film with. I don't think Pan's Labyrinth ends that opens and closes that way, but we'll see when it gets there. But basically this notion of like, what is a man? And the film very deliberately lands on it's your choices that make you who you are. That's a theme of Del Toro's works. It's like, it's what you choose to be and what you choose to do. And I think that's the thing that would be really easy for people to take a step back and say, well, I'm freakish, I'm unloved, I'm unaccepted, I don't have a choice but to be this or do this or to act out or whatever. I don't have a choice because this is just how I was born. This is my resignation to everything. But that's the power of the gospel into which we've been adopted, to Shanghai that metaphor. The gospel into which we've been adopted says, no, you do have a choice. Your father gave you that.
Right.
Like
right.
your father has given you a choice to be better, be different, and to make something different of yourself, that you don't have to be resigned to that verdict that was cast onto your life to say that that's all you will ever amount to. And I found it very powerful, him ripping the horns off of his head and him saying, no, I'm making a choice. I found that to be very effective.
I'm going to make a really maybe odd parallel here and intersect a little bit of personal stuff. I had this really lovely and a little, on my part, emotional conversation with my wife the other night because I was just reflecting on, being in my late 30s, and I am prone to wistfulness, which is not like a cool thing. But just prone towards like it. I would not categorize it as so-and-so has it better than me by any means. That's not what I mean. But in terms of like, I can get very lost in my head, and sort of ponder, I sort of would like to be a little more like X, Y, or Z in terms of personal practice in life. Not like,
sure,
look at that, look at what that guy's wearing. Nothing like that. I'm wearing Marvel Comics house slippers right now. But I came to this real, and perhaps it was the Lord working in my spirit, and I'm going to try to tether this back to what you're going for in a minute. But I had this real like revelatory moment, and astute listeners will have heard me reference a couple times this podcast, Bible for Normal People, and just I read a lot of. I wouldn't say it's academic theology per se, but I read a lot of like theological type of stuff, and there was a piece of material I consumed recently that I don't know if this is what the material was actually saying, but what I took from it that really ministered to me, and what I felt like if the Lord was saying anything to me in all of this, and perhaps I ask you, my friend Reed, to hold me a little accountable to this. Listeners, just do you. But was this interesting conceit and notion. This is consolidating a lot of internal stuff into just a few sentences, and what I said out loud to my wife was like, I will never exhaust what there is to read and what there is to process and what there is to try to get ahead and keep ahead and be on top of the conversation. You will never exhaust that. And even for someone like me, and maybe you would echo this about you, who like, it's part hobby in the sense that you just kind of like it, but it's also part like, no, I want to be a learner. I want to be open to what the Spirit would teach me through people I respect and admire who are doing good ministerial work in the world. But also, I started to feel like I was hitting this wall of like, but what do I do? And I feel like what the Lord was really imparting to me was this kind of simple kind of statement of, you know who you are. Now what do you want to do? You know, and I just was really arrested by that. Like, in other words, there's a way you could construe my consumption of these resources as like, well, who am I in light of these things? And what do I, you know, like, what do I feel about it? And how do I order my inner life and my personal theology and blah, blah, blah. Whereas I think ultimately, and it's a good thing. Like, this is a positive thing where, you know, again, you can attribute it, or I might attribute it to the Lord, or the Spirit working in me of this sort of thing of saying, no, you're right, Nathan. You're never going to get to the end of this stuff. Like, you will always keep reading and consuming. It's kind of what you do. But at a certain point, I want to encourage the Lord to me. I want to encourage you to say, you know who you are.
Right.
Now, in that, what would you like to do? And tying this clearly directly back into this Hellboy idea of like, you have a choice. Your Father gives you that. And I don't know, it really is a powerful idea that I think we can lose sight of. I mean, I know for me personally, easily, in telling that story, it is very easy for me to lose sight of like, there are very few things I hold to as certain truths, certain as in certainty, not particular certain.
Right.
But one of those things I do feel pretty confident of is my self-awareness and my who I feel like I am in relationship to the Lord and who He is to me and how I share that towards others and with others. And so you get to a point where you're like, okay, now do the thing. Like, what thing? Just do it. Make a choice. You know, and I don't know. I know that's on the one hand liberating, on the other hand it's incredibly burdensome.
Sure, of course.
Anyway,
well, I feel like I understand what you're saying, because every choice you make, it can be a little bit frightening, because every choice you make is 5,000 you didn't make. And so there can be a lot of intimidation about like, well, am I going down the right path? Am I making the right decisions? And then there can be a lot of pressure. There's a lot of people who have and will express opinions about you and what you should be doing, that, you know, I'm making air quotes, what you should be doing to yourself. And yeah, I do think that there's a sense of agency that comes with adopting your understanding of your adoption into the body, your grafting into the body, and recognizing that, no, I have been given I have been given agency.
Sure.
I've been given the capacity to choose. I've been given the wherewithal to say, I will do this and not do this. You know, as Gandalf says to Frodo, you know, all we get to decide is what to do with the time that has been given us. And
it's the most beautiful and frustrating line in all of literature.
It is. And I do, and maybe this is a good moment to wind the conversation down, maybe a little briefer than our listeners are used to us being of late. But the scripture that I thought of for this, which may feel a little on the nose, I'll just go ahead and say it is on the nose, but is Joshua chapter 24, an oft quoted passage of scripture. We may have even quoted it before on this show, but it's Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 through 15. It says, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." And this is verse 15. It says, "And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in the land in which you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And again, an oft-quoted scripture, Not a lot to that as I see it, except that you have the agency to decide, are you going to go this path or that path? Are you going to go, involve and invest yourself in this or in that? And I think that is one thing that the idea of the choice that we've been given. My father always likes to say, Christ died to protect your right to choose. And I do think there's some, theological unpacking that we could talk about there, but I think the root of the idea there is that, like, no, the Lord wants choice from you. He wants your will as well as your desire and as well as all of these other things. He wants your will to be active and present and in alignment with the kingdom and the body. And choose this day whom you're going to serve. Are you going to bring about the apocalypse, or are you going to?
Well, and I feel like inherent to what you're saying, but I want to make really clear, and I think you would agree with, like, it's not just agency, but it's identity. Like,
yes, I agree.
In the case of a Hellboy, rather clearly so. You've got the Rasputin wooing him towards one identity, and you've got the love and tenderness of Broom that compels him towards a more healthy whole identity. And what's fascinating, and this is where the agency part comes in, what's fascinating, and apply this how you want to yourself, both of those identities are real and true in him.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They're both factual.
Yeah. And so that can be a talking point in terms of, like, you have the capacity. You can align yourself as in your identity as quote unquote sinner, or you can align yourself in your identity as quote unquote saint. Like, these are at your disposal. And hear me, we're not always going to choose the quote unquote right or best one, but these are at hand, and not only do you have the agency to choose them, but they are wrapped up in what identity, maybe. Ignore the political implications that could come out of this statement, because that's not what I intend in the moment. Maybe you have the capacity to choose that identity. You know what I mean? And which one you're going to align with.
Yeah, there you go. Who are you going to be?
Who are you going to be?
I want us to go ahead and swerve into David S. Pumpkins, but I feel it in my heart to say one more thing about this notion of choice. It says elsewhere in the scriptures, I believe it's in the book of Lamentations, it says, your mercies are new every morning. And I think I've said this on the show before, but I do want to reiterate this as one of the things that I believe is that if you have chosen unwisely for even years, there's an opportunity to you at this moment, very present and fresh every day, to make different choices and better ones and new choices. And when I read the passage that says the Lord's mercies are new every morning, it means his mercies are not used up by the bad choices you made in the years behind you. And there's a possibility and a path set before you to make new, good, and better ones, and choose your identity and choose your direction and your path in what is set before you. So,
amen.
It wouldn't feel appropriate to pigeonhole that. So a little bit briefer conversation than our listeners are used to. But you ready to bring in our uncle, old David S?
Yeah,
David SP.
In the spirit of your altar call, I would have said Deacon Pumpkins. Come on down. We're gonna pass the plate.
Deacon Pumpkins. Oh, that's awesome. Deacon S. Pumpkins. Yes. So yes, as we do every single film that we discuss, we rate these films in a measurement of in David S. Pumpkins. We rate it by style, by scares, and by substance, and then we aggregate that together to spit out a number that is frequently controversial, as we are learning. It's more often than not. If we don't give something a 7, there's going to be some talk. I'm just, but yeah, just go back and listen to our Shining episode, everybody. But no, we're talking today about Hellboy, and so on the level of style, I'll go ahead and lead the way with style if you don't mind. Like, I still think that it's an enjoyable film, but if I were to be fair with the general sort of status of the rest of Del Toro's work and this specific framework in there, I'm going to land at a 3.5 on style.
That's very cool, because I was going to pick a 3.5, because it is
all right,
interesting.
there you go.
Like, I do think there is a lot I like about the movie. So stylistically, I like it.
Sure.
But in terms of just kind of, does it last for me? No, not really. You know, is it one I will pine to go back to? Not really. So 3.5.
Yeah.
Our second metric here in terms of scares, I don't find it very scary. It wrapped up in just some of the imagery, the strong execution of the creature designs and things like that. If I gotta be honest, I might go 2.5 here.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fascinating because I was actually going to go slightly lower too. Here's the thing: it's not the kind of it's an action blockbuster.
Right,
like the creature design is fantastic, but it's not terribly scary, at least not to me. It's pretty thrilling in a couple of places, and then maybe that means that I should edge up my 2 a little bit. But in terms of just like the nightmarish quality, I'm gonna go more because there's also not really something nightmarish or freakish to think about on the thematic level for me. It's more. It just hits my heart in a different way.
I will give my 0.5 is all wrapped up in Cronin. I do think he's
gotcha. He's a creepy,
pretty dang freaky.
Yeah, creepy character. And then for substance, this one's tough because I think it's embedded in the concept, and I think very deliberately, we say Guillermo del Toro adapted. He adapted the screenplay and directed the film, so it's very much his vision of this work. And I'm kind of wanting to lean a little heavier on substance, but I'm going to land at a 3.5 for substance as well, just because I think it's basically just rooted in the concept primarily, and then the rest is just sort of extrapolations you can make.
Yeah, I think I'm more or less with you. It's very on the nose. I'm going to give it a 3 because I do think it's having a conversation. I just think it's a very yeah, exactly. Nature versus nurture. There it is. Sure. You know,
yes.
Is Hellboy going to be his demon self, or is he going to be his good guy self?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that means that we give officially Fear of God ratings for Hellboy, for the first Hellboy. We give it 6 out of 10. David S. Pumpkins.
Well, hey,
which
it's
not
almost
bad.
as good as The Shining.
Almost.
I love that, in the history of cinema, those two probably there aren't more further apart in terms of the horror genre. And for us, they're like a 0.5 apart.
It's so funny. It's so funny. Well, that's why it's a very specific metric as we introduce it every week.
It is.
So 6 out of 10, David S. Pumpkins feels about right for Hellboy. I actually thought it might even land on a 5 or a 5.5. So yeah, 6 feels right. But that's not to say that it's not of value. Like if you're a fan of this kind of thing, it
fun.
is.
It's a fun popcorn movie.
It's fun. It's enjoyable, and I don't know when or if we will ever get around to it, but. If the first Hellboy leaves you somewhat ambivalent, seek out Golden Army. Golden Army is funnier. It's a little creepier. It's got some deeper thematic resonance and does some really great things with the characters. So if Hellboy left you a bit flat, I would say seek out Golden Army because I think it's a very, very good film, and I think in many ways a better film. But yeah, we're still trying to give a lot of love to Guillermo del Toro because we love him and we love his work. So the Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. Let us know your thoughts on Hellboy, on some of the things that we've extrapolated here. And we're going to be picking up next week with another installment of Del Toro. Do you want to go ahead and tell them to check out the next installment? Because there's only one.
I think they know. But
they know. They know.
In case you're just outside of the loop, way outside of it, we will tell you between now and next week. Watch Pan's Labyrinth, and we will discuss it next week on hashtag Del Toro number 3.5 if we count the orphanage. So thank you so much, guys. It's been a fun conversation. We will see you next week. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it is not the end of the conversation. To continue this conversation, you can follow us on Twitter at The Fear of God. Visit us on Facebook to comment on one of our posts or to post there yourself. You can follow Reed on Twitter at Reed Lackey. You can follow Nathan on Twitter at The Nathan Rouse. Visit morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com
That's all one word, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week.